Okay, excellent. Hello, people. Hello.
Hey, Frode.
Hang on a second. Wow, I sent out a, hang on.
I'm in a taxi going somewhere, so
Okay,
it's quite noisy here, so I'll be muted.
cool. Did you guys just get an email from me with 3 dates for your diary?
Yes.
That was not supposed to have been sent, and the date is wrong. That's really annoying. Sometimes mail, if there is a lot of people in the BCC, then it goes a bit funny. So, okay, good. At least now I know. Just writing FOT. Boom. Okay, I'm ready. So, Fabian, how was your holiday? You don't look tanned enough, but you look a little tanned, but.
It's funny that you say this. A colleague said the same, and then they saw me face to face, and I don't think I've been either that tan. So my camera is probably adjusting for a pink Breton can't get tanned. But was lovely, But still glad to be back.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good to hear. It's funny with us white guys, as they say. I got this amazing camera, you know, for reasons. And I did a test. One of the test pictures was a picture of my own face. And I just threw away the whole idea of using the camera for color because of my color of my skin. You know, it has like that whiteness and pinkness and just, yeah, anyway. All right, that's probably not the main theme of the day, how we look in digital imagery. Hello, Stephanie, glad you came back.
Yeah, yes. Is Fabian your speaker?
Fabian is not our speaker. He is the introducer of the speaker. Our speaker joined a few minutes before you, so he logged off. Here he is, to come back in again now. And camera sideways. So while we're waiting for people to come in and the camera is paying, yeah, there we go. The first question I have to ask is, how in the world do I pronounce your name?
And I'll have to ask that back at you after, but it's much easier than it looks in writing. It's Leo with an E in front, so Yiliu.
Yiliu. Okay, I can do Yiliu. Yeah.
Thanks for asking. It's Chinese, and the transliteration for that particular diphthong is super strange. It's like it should be an IOU, but they dropped the O.
One of our very close friends, they have a son who is half English, half Finnish, and his name is Leo. But because of the Finnish side, they actually call him Leo. So when you said it's super simple, Leo is like, no, not necessarily. Anyway, Yiliu. Excellent.
Yes, Yiliu. What I'm also going to do while we have this, you know, we're waiting for people to join, is I'm actually going to be joining this call with a second device.
Yeah. Did we lose you? Oh, okay. Are you setting something up? Okay.
Okay. So these are the sort of fun technical hoops that we have to jump through. But I'm going to do this because I would love to, as I'm speaking and presenting my work, to be actually showing you the apps that I've built so far. And the best way to do that is actually to have a second computer that's joining in and just presenting. So what I'm going to do here is just a second, switch my camera. Okay, to OBS. Okay. And just to make sure, everyone should see two of me. One is the video stream of my face, and the other is a through the lens view of my Quest 2. And what might be helpful is if you're able to pin the through the lens part, I mean, maybe not now, but at the point when I start actually showing the material through the headset, then it might be helpful to pin that
Hang
stream
on.
of me.
Let me,
Yeah.
I'm gonna press a button. Let me see what happens to everyone's screen.
Okay,
Is it now?
amazing.
Change to everyone. Okay, right. So I'll undo that now. And when you want pinning, I will do pinning.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Spotlight. Okay, cool. That's different.
Cool.
We'll wait another minute
Okay.
or two. We are expecting a few more people. So why don't we go around the table and do the exciting thing of reminding people where we are. So Yiliu, did I say it right this time?
Excellent.
You are in Berlin.
Correct.
And going around my screen here, Fabienne, you are in
Brussels, Belgium.
excellent. I'm in Wimbledon. Raphael is in a taxi in somewhere in
In São Paulo, Brazil.
fantastic. Stephanie, you are Stephanie, where are you in the world?
All right. It's away in my kitchen. I'm in New York City. I'm in Manhattan.
I was about to say probably away getting coffee. So, but yes, you're in
Yes.
your kitchen, so close enough. Manhattan. And Brendel, you are in Silicon Valley.
Right.
Fantastic. I'm going to ping Mark Anderson. He's got a back problem. I'll see if he's well enough to join us. We were delayed 3 hours coming back from the Hypertext Barcelona, which is normally fine, except we were delayed standing in line for 3 hours. So I was argumentative going up and checking at the desk. He was standing still most of the time, and hence his back just isn't doing very well. So that's what he gets from being a polite English gentleman. And we're going to check Twitter, and then we will jump in. Okay, fantastic. So the meeting is recorded, and we will also record the Q&A, of course. The transcript of everything will go into the journal. And yes, let's start. Oh, that was cool. Did you all see that? When you put down, is it tea or coffee? That's important.
It's green tea at this hour.
Okay, great. Put down the green tea. It showed up in the AR view. So with that, let's start. Oh, just briefly, Jack is joining us. Hello, Jack. You are in Silicon Valley in bed. So now we've established where everyone is. Excellent. So yeah, please continue.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rhoda, for inviting me to this call. And it's a great pleasure to, well, first of all, to have been introduced to the work of this group, and now to have a chance to finally see everybody and to meet everybody. Actually, before I go into my very unprepared remarks, and I'll explain in a second why that is, I'm very curious to hear from you, Froda. First of all, is that how I should pronounce your name? Okay. And I would love to hear from you, maybe a little bit of the origin stories of this working group and why this overlap between XR and text in particular, because I was very surprised and pleasantly slow to discover that this working group existed, because I've been kind of in the VR space for 5 or 6 years now, and the vast majority of content is, of course, for entertainment, gaming, and the focus often is on visuals, on the 3D models, on whiz bang effects, and to have people who are seriously tackling the question of how to represent text and let people work with text. I think to me, it's very like obvious that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. To me, it is extremely prescient because I've spoken to a lot of people in the space, and only very, very recently have people started to take seriously the idea of working with text in VR, and usually in the context of something like a virtual desktop. So using headsets as monitor replacements. So I'd love to hear just from the source where this working group is coming from, and maybe even to better understand. I mean, I'm getting a sense that there's a certain academic focus in these conversations and a level of rigor that is not like present in most conversations about VR, to be very frank. But also how close you feel like the things you're seeing are to some sort of like mainstream user relevance.
I'm glad we have 2 hours, because now you made the mistake of asking me to speak, and I will. There's a couple of kind of origin stories to this, and hi, Peter. Very glad you're here.
Sorry I'm late. My mom needed some early morning transport, and we just got back.
Oh, don't worry. So Yiliu asked me, what's going on in this group? Why do we exist, and what's the point? So there's a couple of things. For me personally, it was very, very simple. I was doing a PhD, handed in my paper at the end of last year, and then Brandel was like, maybe you can look into another dimension now. And I said, yeah, okay, maybe. And then it took a few weeks, and bam. What has happened to me, and I think the group shares this perspective, is VR will be a medium that, just like everyone has a smartphone, in 5 to 10 years, everybody's got a headset. Whether it's AR, VR, for me at least, is completely irrelevant, because you'll be able to toggle anyway. So there's billions being spent by big companies and the issues you discussed on how they can make money. That is what they're researching. They're not researching how to save humanity or how to make us smarter, nothing like that. They're purely interested in making money. Nothing wrong with that. That is their job. Our job as an interested community is to say, and this is different from what you guys have heard before, the childhood, when you are young, you have a different level of awe and understanding of the world. That kind of goes later. The childhood of our engagement with what VR might be is so precious, because this is the time when our imagination has freedom, because we don't have things defined by the big boys yet. So that's why I'm really stressing and saying we have to do this now. That's why this Future of Text symposium in September will be knowledge work in VR. Vint Cerf is flying in. There's going to be some amazing people. You're all welcome to come physically if you can, otherwise it'll be virtual. But to really press home the point, I found this book this week. It's not a very big book. Oh yeah. Stephanie, you want to say something real quick?
I just want to say that the Electronic Literature Organization has a lot of people that have been working with text and AR and VR for a very long time. And they're not about making money at all. And they address a lot of different things. And the latest electronic literature collection includes some of those works. So someone like Caitlin Fisher and some people who work in Canada have done a lot of work in this, along these lines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying nobody's working on it. I'm just saying that the people who will make the systems, Dini Gregar, whom you of course know, she is one of the curators, hosts of this Future of Text. So we're definitely including the ELO perspective. But the reason I'm saying this now, and I'm not going off topic and I'm not going to talk forever, I promise, is simply that Karen Armstrong, who has written about spiritualism and literature, and it's not literature. Stop writing stuff, guys. I have to read it. It's like making me lose concentration. She has written about the origins of religions, whether you're religions or not, doesn't matter for this context. She's saying that if we're going to save the planet, we have to see not a god or whatever up there in a cloud. We have to see the whole planet as being holy, whatever that might mean to us. So the reason I find it so relevant to this group and our work is she said before, Raphael, enough already. Before we had European Christianity, and she goes into detail why. I shall not bore you with that. The earlier systems of viewing the work was with mythos and logos. Of course, logos is more the rational side of the brain, which kind of took over. Mythos is not just myth, like, you know, a rabbit running down and who's faster. Mythos in this view is about the more artistic, poetic, which is why it's so important what you're saying, Stephanie, that side of things, for us to understand a deeper side of what it is to be in the world. And ironically, perhaps, I feel that virtual reality can help us, even though it completely removes us from the world, can help us better understand our relationship with the world. So that's why this is profoundly deep. Are we going to go into VR as a sugar pill? Or are we going to go there to get a better understanding of each other, ourselves, and reality? And coming from a text perspective, which is now very broad, it's just to say, text is one of the elements that are really important if you're going to do serious work.
Mhm.
So that's the prompt. I hope that helps you a little bit.
That is extremely helpful. Thank you for that intro, and that offers me some guide rails on how I'm going to tell the story of what I'm working on, and showing that work to all of you. So
hang on just a quick second. Brandel doesn't have his hand up to interrupt very often, so it's got to be important.
I just would love to tell the rationale for why I brought VR to the world, to the group, and that is that I've been looking at text in VR for about 10 years. Ever since people sort of started even bringing up the idea of the Oculus DK1, I was like, what is the most boring thing you could do with the most interesting technology that's out there? And the more I sort of dug into the question, the more I realized that it's one of the more important things that you can consider and imagine, because it's the thing that most of us do most of the time. It's reading and writing text. Other people do different things with computers, insofar as they maybe do architecture or telesurgery or other crazy things like that. But what the common threads of everything that we have to do with computing is text. And I'd also looked a lot into Van Neverbush's As We May Think and JCR Licklider and Doug Engelbart, realizing that the idea of text and connecting text was one of the central rationales for the invention of the computer in the first bloody place. That between those two things, having the ability to do that in virtual reality was going to be the single most transformative thing that could ever happen to computers and consequently to people, if we could get away with it. So that's what I've been playing with. That's what I've been doing. And I'm pleased to announce now that I am officially starting my role as immersive web experiences prototyping on the 22nd of July. I'll be moving over to that, and it'll be very exciting to be able to play with those questions and those ideas on behalf of the great big mega giants that Frode waved a magic scary ones about the intentions and the capabilities of. So yeah, I'm playing both sides of the team there.
Fantastic, Mr. Apple. All right, wonderful, excellent.
Thank you for that as well. A lot of those references are ones that are close to my heart at the moment, and close to my mind as well, because I've been sort of immersed in them, especially over the last couple of weeks. But my own journey into the specific question of VR and text is actually a little bit circuitous. It's not where I started out, and in fact, only very recently in my process of prototyping and building what is ultimately intended to be a commercial product, an app that people will download and use, and be financially self-sustaining. The role of text has only recently become a very central one, and probably honestly the reason for that was because I was a little bit scared of this question of working with text in VR, because I think all of us who use computers on a regular basis, we know how central text is, and it seemed to be the point at which all of the shortcomings of the hardware up until very recently came to the most obvious head, where it seemed like the screen resolution and and more than the screen resolution, the fact that text is just presented on a 2D plane, and there just didn't seem to be a need to work with it in a 3-dimensional way, or at least at first glance. I think all of these factors contributed to my sort of reticence in tackling text. But recently I started doing it, and it's been absolutely incredibly mind-opening. And I think there are, so what Frodo said earlier about the combination of spatial interfaces with text, finally, or being one of the most transformative sort of technological opportunities that are coming our way. I totally agree with. And what Randall was saying about this actually being, this combination actually being existing way back in the earliest histories of computing, and also with Ivan Sutherland's AR experiments. Actually, people have been wanting to do this for decades, and only very recently, because of these billion-dollar tech giants and their investments, has it become technically feasible for people like me, just to like throw things together and actually have it work and be usable. So all that aside, really quickly, 5 years ago, I was a VR research resident at an artist studio here in Berlin. I was on leave from architecture school. There's an artist here in Berlin called Olaf Eliasson, who has a very big operation, over 100 programmers, designers, craftspeople, PR people, social media people, and among them myself, the VR research resident. And the reason why I got this job was because the DK2 had just come out. Someone in the studio had bought 2 of them, and they realized that there was nothing to do, there was nothing to run on these apps. They couldn't just download something and run with it. It was very, very early days. So I convinced someone that I knew enough programming to do something interesting with these headsets. I didn't, but I did. I was able to very luckily throw together enough of something every 2 weeks or so to show the rest of the studio that I was able to teach myself more and more of the sort of technical skills required. But coming from architecture, I was very comfortable with remodeling and Unity and things like this. And what happened over the course of that 1 year was that we were building these prototypes to explore the potential of virtual reality as either a medium for actual artworks or as a tool for the production process of other works which may not end up being digital at all, but as a working environment. Both very sort of fruitful and still sort of very fruitful avenues for the application of this technology. At the time, I was using Evernote because that was kind of like the best digital notebook that was around, or the only one I knew about. And very quickly, it became super annoying to use Evernote to manage this prototyping cycle. So I was trying to build something every 2 weeks, collecting ideas by talking to people in the studio, throwing together a working program and then showing it to them at the end of the week of the cycle. And to manage sort of all the ideas that were coming in and all the ideas were going out, I was using Evernote. And it was a huge pain to make sense of all the ideas that I had been collecting. And that there's stuff in there, you know that you'll never find it again, right? It's like sort of a classic issue with 2D UIs. And at the same time, I was in this artist studio that is just covered from floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Takes up this entire like old beer brewery in the middle of Berlin with the physical artifacts of the design processes and creative processes of the other teams around. And so I started thinking, and this isn't just me, this is also, there were snippets of this kind of idea during the demos and during my conversations with the artist himself about why we couldn't use this inherently spatial medium to actually start recreating some of the advantages of a physical workspace with physical artifacts and pieces of information around. And this really started getting me thinking. And I started prototyping something, pulling information from their in-house CMS that was used to power the website with archival images and things, previous exhibitions and works. And it quickly became clear that, like, okay, an artist studio is not the right kind of environment to start trying to build a brand new like tool, general purpose tool, right? And I didn't really, I mean, I was coming from architecture school. I knew I didn't actually want to become an artist or an architect for that matter. And so I decided, okay, this is probably a tech startup. I don't know what that is, but that sounds like, you know, a thing and people give me money to do it. So in 2018, we founded a company, got a little bit of investment from an accelerator in Silicon Valley, and started trying to build a spatial virtual studio for designers called SoftSpace, and that's still the name of the company and the product. And at the time, the overriding, I guess, quite skeuomorphic paradigm that I had was that you would have this very large, you know, like your dream sort of studio workspace, where the laws of physics and the constraints of physical materials didn't apply, but you would still have a lot of the sort of behaviors and affordances of the physical media that especially like visual artists or designers are used to working with. And so I'm gonna just quickly jump into my headset now, Rhoda, and show you the version of the software that, thank you, that we built and released on SideQuest, which is this indie, okay, here we go, which is an indie app store. And it's where we sort of first battle tested our sort of vision for what, you know, the future of creative knowledge work might be. So, this is SoftSpace, and we call it, just for shorthand, SoftSpace version 2020, because it was first released in July 2020, almost exactly 2 years ago. And this is what it looks like. I know the field of view here is not going to be massive, so I'm going to try to keep my hands sort of like in the middle of my field of view. But you can see here that what you have is very literally a massive white walled room.
This feed is frozen. Is it frozen for everyone?
Oh, okay.
It briefly
Not
froze.
for
It's,
me.
it's working for me now.
Not frozen.
Working now.
Can see the headset.
Okay.
It's somewhere
For-
frozen for me. If it gets horrible, I'll interrupt you again. Otherwise, I'm hoping. Actually, hang on. I'm the one doing the recording, so I have to see this.
Oh yeah. How about I can jump off on the my PC and then jump back on.
That really shouldn't make a difference. That's very odd that it's not frozen for anyone else. But now it's actually gray.
Okay.
Let me see. I'm stopping video on there, so you can start it again. How about that? Is that okay?
What should I do at this point?
I'm trying to stop video on your headset.
Okay.
and it won't actually let me do that. Okay, I'll remove spotlight, stop video. Yeah, video has stopped. So if you can try to turn video on again, maybe it's that simple.
So my video is still running from what I can see.
Yeah.
Does everyone else see my video?
No, we see you.
Okay.
Yeah, we see your
Oh.
webcam. We don't see your Quest feed.
On your Quest, there's a still picture of you now.
Okay, I see. And I'm just going to try to start the video again, but it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it on
Okay.
the Quest feed.
That's correct. So I'm now going to ask you to start video. So that should now be
Okay.
okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, I can see that.
Okay.
Is
You
that
know
bad?
what?
Okay.
I'm not going to enlarge it. We'll leave it like this.
Okay.
Just so yeah, is that okay?
Okay.
Individuals can right click and pin it if they so desire.
So I think the Quest is having a little bit of a tracking issue. How's that now?
It's working.
Okay.
We
Okay.
need to
Work
see
space
his view.
materializing.
We're not getting a view of that. We're not getting what he's seeing.
Yeah, so I
I,
believe that if you're, for example, on a mobile device, then probably the Quest view is not going to be highlighted because there isn't any audio coming from it, unless Frodo pins it again.
Maybe what it is, hang on, the Quest feed is on a separate participant in the meeting. So if you're looking at,
Correct.
you're not seeing the feed, you have to pin the feed separately while he's talking. Okay, so look at your view of the participants in the meeting, then you'll see one of the participants showing the view inside the Quest, and click pin on that cam feed, and then you'll be seeing what he's seeing as opposed to seeing him talking when he's talking. Did that help?
But Froda has to do that and he didn't. He's not doing it.
No, you can do that in your own Zoom client.
Yeah.
Just select from the Zoom the participant list. Then in the participant list, you'll see the in-world image of the Quest, and then pin that feed.
When I pinned it for myself, it removed the video again. Such early days with this technology, huh, guys?
Oh, no. Okay.
Can you just manually try to stop and start video and we leave it small? Stephanie, are you on a computer or a mobile device?
There is one more thing, Frodo, that I could try, which is
I'm
that
on
I
a
could
com-
try.
I'm on a computer and the participant list doesn't distinguish between the two things of Yiliu.
No, but they are. It is as though it's a completely different person. It should
It's
be.
a different person.
But it looks like, two copies of the same person. It doesn't indicate which is the
Well,
VR
That's
view.
true. Yeah.
So,
The
Try
one
the
that never
opposite one of
talks.
the one
is
you have
the one wanna
selected.
pin. Is this better?
I can
Yes.
see it. I can see it.
Yeah,
Will it
it's
move?
better,
Will it
yeah.
move?
So what I'm doing now is I'm actually sharing the screen instead of feeding. I'm sharing the screen now. So
Yeah,
that should
works. That
force
works.
force Zoom to just show this through the lens view to everybody. There you go. The only downside to this mode is that the frame rate is going to be quite low. So I'm just going to move very slowly, and that way you should sort of see what I am doing. Does that sound good? Okay. So I'll just start
that
from the
makes a
top
lot of
again,
sense.
which is that Space version 2020 is in many ways a recreation of the big empty white room that you can pin stuff up in wherever you like, that came out of the experiences I had working at this art studio. That's a very sort of like simplistic way of describing the paradigm here. A slightly sort of secondary or second order understanding or explanation for why this app works the way it does is that I didn't have any idea what the right layout paradigms or what the right sort of even structural relations between pieces of information in a three-dimensional user interface should be at all. And so this version of the app was it was never intended for a broader distribution on an official app store or anything. It's what we were calling internally a Cartesian sandbox. You can grab any item, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over here to find my text. I'm gonna grab this little text note here. So I can make it big, I can make it small, I can move it freely in three-dimensional space, and I can rotate it within certain sort of like it snaps in terms of its rotation, but I can kind of put it wherever I want. And within this Cartesian playground, you have a lot of the, I mean, in a sense, you have all of the freedom and power of spatiality to express relations between things by putting them, by positioning them and scaling them relative to each other. So if any of you are familiar with the whiteboarding app Miro, M-I-R-O, this is essentially a 3D version of Miro, okay? And you can see that there are objects which are containers, and these containers can hold other things. There are objects which are boards, which are 2D containers. You can pop items off of and put them onto the boards. And there even is, for example, a fully functional built-in web browser that you can agree to get cookies installed onto. And you can Google for topics that might be of interest during your research process. And if you find an image of something you like, you can pop it out and save it to your workspace, like so. So this was.
Hang on, am I allowed to ask a question
yeah.
and interrupt you?
Please, yes,
Okay.
please.
So one of the things we have discussed and that I have a great fear of is ghettoizing or sandboxing or whatever it might be. And currently there are, of course, many applications where you can view your laptop screen in VR, and they're all quite neat. But the problem is that that is just a texture, it's just isolated. So can you please elaborate on how you took something from that screen into the room? Because I think that is really wonderful and important.
Okay, sure.
Can I ask a question too, which is, can you get the text off a 2D surface and set the letters free in the 3D space?
Not yet, but I will get there. So that's a really great question. And Frode, the question you asked about, the context of the question you asked about sandboxing is exactly what prompted me at the sort of end of sort of 12 months of having this version of the app out in the wild, hearing feedback from it, watching people using it, deciding, no, this is not the direction, and kickstarting my latest cycle of prototyping. But just to really speak specifically about the technical, I guess, implementation of this popping things off. This is a fully functional Firefox web browser running inside the SoftSpace app. And I'm using a package called Vueplex, and this is all running in Unity C#. But what Vueplex lets me do is pass messages between the HTML JavaScript environment inside the browser and the C# environment outside of the browser in this app itself. And so whenever my cursor touches something that is marked as an image, the browser tells the VR app, and the VR app then knows, okay, your cursor is actually hovering over something that can be downloaded out as an image. And so you see this icon, it changes from this manipulation icon to this copy out icon. And if I press the trigger, then I'm actually, it's going to the URL, the original URL of this image, and downloading the full resolution version of this image, and then saving it to the cloud storage backend that we're using for this particular version of the app.
Can you also copy text that way?
So you can also, so you can copy paste, and the way you do that is there's a separate tool called Snip. So if, for example, if this whole thing, this website were not actually accessible as an image, like sometimes website makers decide to hide everything under an element that blocks your ability to directly select things, I can press the trigger on this controller, switch to a snipping tool, which will just make a copy of this entire, any part of the web texture that I wish to make a copy of. Give it a second, because I might need a second to there it goes. So that's the just a straight one-to-one texture copy of what the browser was seeing. And that same tool actually lets me, if I just click, lets me make a copy of, oh goodness.
You have more than one person in this room currently.
Yes, yes. This is fully multi-user enabled. Okay. So so as I was saying earlier, this was released on the SideQuest indie app store, which is a side-loading early access sort of marketplace for apps. We have about 3,000 registered users and 6,000 downloads of the app, and even a handful of paying users for the premium plan. But when I was thinking about, okay, how would we then take this and bring it to market to the official app store for the Quest headset, which has a much, much larger user base, I realized that I was, at a fundamental level, immensely dissatisfied with the paradigm that this app represents. And in fact, this paradigm was never intended to be the final paradigm. This was very much a research, an applied research sort of vehicle to understand what people wanted to do if they were given the ability to place 2D content, largely because we're talking about images and text blocks, what they would want to do with 2D content in a 3D space that they could freely, place things in and move themselves around. And this is what prompted then my kickstarting the cycle of prototyping, rapid prototyping, and then releasing those prototypes into the public on Twitter mostly, that I started in February of this year, which has been incredibly rewarding and fruitful. And I'm just going to show you a couple of those experiments, which will then lead you all the way up to the final point of where I am today. Questions I have for you as a group of people who have been thinking about these problems for a lot longer than I have, or much more deeply than I have. And also, I believe it was it Barbara? No. Stephanie, who asked the question about being able to pull text off. Is that correct? Sorry, I'm like trying to figure out who the speakers were. Okay,
Yes.
I will get to that. I will get to that at the very end of it, and I don't let me forget. I'll show you what I mean.
Okay,
Okay, so
and
here we
also
are.
changing the font at any point and so on.
I see. Okay, yeah. So specific text formatting tools, I actually have not spent a lot of time building out, but I will show you what I have been looking at. Okay, so this is in a literal like nutshell, if you scale it real down. This is SauceBase version 2020, and a very instructive research environment for figuring out what the actual paradigm for SauceBase that would actually tap into the full power of this medium should be. Okay, so I'm just gonna quit. Oh my goodness, quit this app.
Do you need a PC to run this, or can it be run independently in just a headset?
This is all standalone. This is not, we do have a PC version, but this is running completely on the Quest.
Vint and I are planning to do a bit of a VR session. Would you maybe be able to do a guided tour when we all have headsets for this? Because
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
know that would be great, because I know it's part of your story, but even the things that are in there are so, okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
No, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to give you a tour. So I'm actually going to go backwards a little bit from the prototypes that I had been building starting from February. And I'm going to start with prototype number 3, which is the latest one that I published, and which I was very happy with for getting a bunch of attention on Twitter. And prototype 03. There are a couple of things you will notice right off the bat. So the first thing is that this is an augmented reality or mixed reality enabled application. So there's no longer sort of this like completely immersive virtual environment that you're thrown into, which blocks out your view of your physical surroundings. And I had come to the realization that even me personally, someone who's worked in VR for many years now and should be very comfortable with this medium, every time I went into VR and covered up my eyes, I had this just really sort of inevitable low-level sense of unease and vulnerability that came from not being able to see my surroundings. And so when Oculus, back when it was still Oculus, released the pass-through SDK and made it possible for app developers to access pass-through video, I was skeptical at first, and I tried it, and this is the future. This is like, SauceBase will always be an augmented reality or mixed reality app from now on. And then the second thing is that I just put my controllers down because everything is now being controlled by my hands only. So this is just the standard Oculus hand tracking. It's gotten very good. It's gotten a lot better than it was when I first started playing with it. And the combination of these two features, the pass-through video and hand tracking, also were one of the, they were kind of like the enabling factors for me to really start thinking seriously about text input, because it means that you can have a keyboard, right, a physical Bluetooth keyboard that you can easily start typing on without putting your controllers down first, and that you can see because it's pass-through enabled. So this is sort of the context of the prototyping cycle that I'm currently embarked on. And the specific question that prototype 03 was trying to answer was, how could you map an ordinal set of information onto a 3-dimensional space? And I just want to, I'm sure you all know what those words mean, but specifically what I mean is, in the previous version of SauceBase, and as Frodo was saying, there is this issue that information that is arranged in a 3-dimensional Cartesian layout. 2D has this issue as well, but 3D makes it just infinitely more impossible, is forever stuck inside a 3D environment, because there is no reliable, dependable, sensible way to take a collection of information that's sort of like, arbitrarily placed in 3D space and, for example, export it to something you could email and have someone else read it on their phone on the train. And if that's going to be the case, then I found this from our users and from myself as well. You're just not going to be willing to invest time and energy into working on something if it's just, it's only going to be stuck inside the headset. And by the way, like 95% of the time, you yourself in the future will not have access to a headset. So if the work you do, you can't even access it yourself reliably, you're just not going to want to do, put any time into it. And so prototype 03 was trying to figure out, okay, or like in what world would it make any sort of sense for the underlying data structure that your 3D workspace is representing to actually be a ordinal data format? For example, I'm just using an example here, Markdown, right? So if everyone's familiar with Markdown, a wonderful standard for like interchange between different applications, could a VR AR app actually be working with Markdown under the hood, and what would that even mean? And so, that's the one question. And the dumbest possible way, of course, to answer it would be, and this is something that you do see around in different applications, would be just to put a 2D window inside of VR that has a 2D UI and shows you a Markdown file, or shows you a website or whatever, shows you ordinal content the same way you see it on your laptop. But of course, if you take that approach, you're giving up all of the richness of the expressiveness of spatial semantics. You're giving up all the sort of like the whole point of putting the headset on, right? And I didn't want to go that, like, I'm sure other people are working on the virtual desktops. They're going to be amazing. That's just not where I felt like I can make the biggest contribution. So how would you represent Markdown file in 3D without resorting to importing a 2D paradigm? Well, the answer I sort of came up with, and I call here the ordinospatial layout, is one where you do have a set of very strict rules for determining the order of things, but you're using all three spatial dimensions to express that order. So to give you a very to make it clear what I'm talking about. So this block of text, this text block, is its own object, and it can live sort of at a specific place in this column, right? And so if you were to take this and you were to export it as a Markdown file, which by the way, the headset is doing. So this entire workspace is right now saved out as a Markdown. Every time you write something here, it's saved out as Markdown. This would be the first paragraph, this would be the second, this would be the third, etc. You can also move it over here. And maybe I just want to place another block of text below this. And I can start typing on it. I can say, okay, hello. I really can't touch type, by the way. Hello, everybody, right? And so you can see that I can move this sort of along this plane. I can start constructing columns of text. And I can move things relatively freely. If I want to move this thing like way all the way over here, I kind of don't want to think about it for now, I can do so. But it has a definite point and definite order within the global set of content. There's no place I can put it that doesn't have a meaning. And to extend this to the third dimension, I can always move these blocks of text between these series of planes that are actually not visually represented at all. That's one of the shortcomings of this prototype. They're invisible, and you kind of have to just know that, okay, there will be a plane there if I pull this thing over far enough. Okay, so this is prototype number 3. And this got a lot of attention on the internet, and people started asking, could you do this? Could you do that? Could you start breaking free of this very strict ordinal layout? And it was great because I suddenly started having really rigorous and in-depth conversations with people who had thought very, very seriously about this kind of question. how do you represent ordinal content in a three-dimensional way, and without losing the benefits of one or the other, including being introduced to this group here. And what I just want to show you now, I'm going through like jumping through between the prototypes. Stephanie, you asked about the possibility of pulling something off, and so in this particular prototype, you can move things around, but the objects are always, or the text blocks are always going to have a place within the underlying, essentially, markdown file. There's no way that I can pull this over here and say, this is going to be in a completely different area altogether. I don't want to think about it. It's going to end up in the markdown file. This entire space is just one 3D markdown file. And of course, that's not where this experiment has to, this cannot be where this experiment ends. And so I want to show you prototype number 4, work in progress, just what I'm currently working on. And
just to add,
yes.
Since the very first minute you started presenting, you could have stopped at any point and our minds would still have been very, very pleased.
Okay. Well, I hope you have some capacity left for both enjoying this demo and also questions, critiques, thoughts, avenues of research and exploration, because this is exactly the phase I'm in right now. So, okay, prototype number 4 says, well, yes, it's great that I can take these blocks of text and I can work with them in 3D and have this beautiful board of stuff in front of me that I know will be exportable easily as an email or exportable as a presentation, or and I can finish writing here and then or I can draft up something here and finish writing it on my phone on the train ride home. But that, aren't we over constraining things a little bit? Like, what if you want something that is not actually in this document? Let's think of this board as a document, but is related to it and lives nearby, or maybe lives in another document over here because it's a 3D canvas. So we can do all these things that we can't easily do in a 2D UI. Well, maybe you could just take something like this text block and pop it off and just have it start floating nearby, right? And you could run a little 3D force-directed graph simulation so that everything is spaced out very comfortably. And using, is everyone here familiar with Rome research, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, so using something like Rome research, it's double square bracket notation for indicating references to other topics. Maybe as I'm typing here, I could start adding references. Oh, this topic, oh, that topic, and those references actually become newly created free-floating objects, which then start through the force-directed graph simulation, start pulling the blocks of text which are related to that that block you're working on closer to where you are working, and pushing the things that are not so related further out. So you start getting a 3-dimensional representation of these semantic relations of all the elements inside a project you're working on. And so you can see here, there's, I've just pulled a couple of little blocks of things off. They're floating around. If they try to flee from each other, so like,
I do have a question here.
Yes.
Who decides what's related to what here?
You do manually. So there's no, there's no, in the system I'm designing right now.
You said that things started, you said things started aggregating on the basis of their relation.
Yes, and so what I was mentioning earlier was in Rome, what you can do, and this is something, so this is my current work in progress prototype, so it's not implemented here, but in Rome you could create a tag or create a new topic. Actually, in Rome, it's a new note. You can create a new note with using this notation of a double square bracket and say, for example, Froda, right? And this would create automatically, for example, a Froda object over here. And then in other parts of the document where I have mentioned Froda, or I've written exactly this like string of text, double square bracket with Froda in the middle, the Froda object would start floating. And the thing is, there would have to be some sort of visual indication of the relation. So there'd be some sort of line that would draw from, yeah.
Okay, so my question is, that means ahead of time you had to tag things, right? So what I'm interested in is what kind of a space where as I glance over it and now connections are occurring to me that have not occurred before, am I able to create some kind of skeleton or structure or, you know, whatever kind of structure I use, tree or otherwise, that I can on the fly create this thing? I don't want to have decide ahead of time. If I decide ahead of time, I already know all I need to know about the text. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I would actually say that the secret to Rome research and its success was its insight that even if you are manually adding in these references as you're writing up your notes, it doesn't mean that you are able to hold in your mind a global picture of where else in the entire sort of set of notes you've ever mentioned this one topic. And so you're always working locally. You're sort of saying, okay, today I'm going to write up some reading notes about this book that Frodo like presented, for example. And I'm writing some reading notes. I'm going to create some square brackets to annotate topics. And then you switch to a different view in Rome, and you see all the other places where that topic has been backlinked, and you get a global picture. And so I would say that actually it's not that you have to tag things ahead of time. It's that as you are working, you're just pulling out these instances of references, and then you take a step back and you look around and you see. And just
okay, wait a second. I want to say all relations are not references.
It's true. Yes.
Okay, so you have a very citation-based kind of idea. I mean, obviously you have a huge database and you can aggregate different parts of it as you query it different ways, right? But the point is, how do you create different structures of relation, right? On the basis of interacting with lots of text. Do you see what I'm saying? It's
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I don't know if you are familiar with Jack Rusher. He's based here in Berlin, and he worked on the semantic web. And he and I had this exact same conversation. And you're absolutely correct that not all relations between two things are a reference, or even, I mean, yes, it is a reference, but it's much more nuanced than that. It's what kind of reference? Is it supporting evidence? Is it refuting evidence? Is it qualifying information? Is it an instance of
or it's architectural. I refer you back to your architectural training. I mean, I might have a whole set of terms from architecture or from music, right?
Yep.
In terms of which I could create a structure, which is not based on citational reference.
Correct. And so in that case, you might be talking about containment relations, where there is a taxonomy that you're trying to build up. And that is also absolutely possible in this work in progress I'm building, or the future version of it. I haven't built it out yet. I'll show you in the next demo something that, what it could look like, but just to maybe hint at where the possibility for doing that kind of relation building comes from. I would just like to note that this document itself can be seen as, for example, an instance of this Froda type topic in which I have placed a bunch of Froda related blocks. So I could also create many of these containers in a nested fashion and start building up these taxonomies of meaning and of information that Stephanie you're talking about. I'm just going to go to the final demo, which will maybe hint at where this is all kind of going. Boom. Oh my goodness, come on.
So I think it would be nice if everybody could build their own kind of memory palace out of the material. Do you know what I mean by memory palace?
I do, and I would say that even the paradigm I've just showed you would make that totally possible. Because
everybody could make their own, right?
Yes, yeah. So this is actually prototype 01, and I just wanted to show you, and the order is intentional here. So prototype 01 is very, very different from what I've shown you before. This is actually an interface for navigating my personal Dropbox. And there's one folder called sauce-based research. I'm going to select this Dropbox folder to be spatialized. And you'll see what it's doing.
Oh, much better.
There you go. Yes. So this is why I'm sorry, Stephanie, that I cut you off a little bit. I wanted to move on to this demo to show you what some of the possibilities start to be, right? So, I mean, this is very simple. What we're looking at is folders in folders with images. And I'm just using that sort of like very simple directed tree containment structure to build a 3-dimensional force-directed graph. It's pulling in little
And
previews.
can you push your hand into there to twist that structure?
Yes. So I could, for example, say, oh, I like this branch needs to go over here. It's going to take a second because there's a lot of stuff to pull.
Yeah,
but yes. Yeah.
Can you then put it all on the surface of a dome?
No, but by combining this and the previous demo I just showed, you would be able to, for example, to indicate, okay, I want to see this topic, but laid out ordinally. Like, what is the actual, now once I get to start working on it, I want to be able to write some notes and place things in a specific order that makes sense to read from beginning to end. While, and this is the point I was trying to make earlier, while the rest of the content, which is not contained in that ordinal layout, can still float nearby and can adapt to the positioning of the things in the ordinal layout. So you can look around and, okay, actually this other topic is also related. Let me make sure I mention that or pull something in from there. Prototype 01 doesn't have any sort of like text. I kind of worked backwards here because prototype 01 was very much about 3-dimensional force-directed graph, hand tracking, pass-through video. Text was too scary for me even at that point, and it took me a second to like build up the courage almost to really tackle it, because what if it turned out that there was just no good way to work with text in VR? Then my project would be, it would be that's a major dead end to run into. But happily, I think like prototype 2, 3, 4 proves that actually it's very pleasant to write in VR. You have no distractions. You can place the text you're working on right in front of you. It's actually really nice. The only issue being right now, the ergonomics of the headset need to be improved. I'm going to let this sort of leave this running just over here and put my headset down with a nice close-up view of it. Okay, let me move it down a bit. There you go. Okay, I'm back. Questions?
First of all,
prototype 4 is work in progress. There's a lot of things I want to like. I haven't finished building yet, but I'm very open to ideas like the ones that Stephanie has been offering about how to connect all these technical and like whiz bang UI demos back to real things that real people do to get real things done.
Yeah, that's important. I do have an initial question actually, and that is on the issue of collapsing and expanding. Because especially in your previous view, there was a lot of stuff which is amazing. So what mechanism do you have for, okay, I'm dealing with this, I want that stuff out of the way right now?
Yeah, none in these prototypes. I was literally thinking about this earlier today, because you do get to a point pretty quickly, when you have a few hundred items. And by the way, text level of detailing, LEDing, is another very interesting issue that arises in the 3D environment. Because you can't read text that's like, just far away enough that the letters are too small. But collapsing things probably, I don't fully know the answer yet, but probably it will be via the topic containers. So probably you will do your querying in a sense, or highlighting of the content items by saying which topics do I want to keep visible and which topics do I not need to be distracted by at this point. And maybe by turning on or off certain topic containers, the nodes themselves, any content item that is not directly or maybe 2 degrees of separation related to those topics would be probably not disappear altogether. You'd probably want some visual indication, oh, there's something over there, but it could be a small sort of icon representation instead of full content itself. But to be totally like, I don't know the answer to that yet, because I think it'll come, the best approach will make itself known through people actually trying to use this thing and then realizing, oh, I need to hide certain kinds of things away, and what is the logic even to decide which things to hide and which things to remain to keep in the workspace.
Okay. And then a tiny question before, I'm sure there's going to be billions from everyone. In your AR use here with the pass-through, the background on my screen at least is monochromatic, slightly warm. Is this something that you have the ability to decide how it's rendered?
So the fact that it's monochromatic is a hardware limitation of this headset. Very happily, you can see in all the promotional videos that Meta has been releasing about their upcoming hardware, and also on the various leaks on YouTube, that Meta and also rumor has it Apple, all these sort of billion-dollar projects are leaning very heavily into full color, high resolution, low latency pass-through. So yeah,
I'm kind of leaning in the other direction, because the normal pass-through is kind of harsh. So did you filter a little bit to reduce the contrast?
I did.
And
That's actually, yeah, I did. I dramatically reduced the luminance levels and also reduced the contrast a little bit, because it is impossible to focus on free floating digital content when you also see your full color room around you. So when the pass-through gets much better, I'm sure I will still have to tone it down to make it usable.
Do you have an interaction feeling for how that should be done? Because I could imagine with the next generation hardware, you'd want to be in really great resolution, see the room, and then you want to tone it down. Have you thought about how to position?
I have. So there's one thing I have, let me see. Well, yeah, the short answer is yes, because to make a lot of the promotional videos for these prototypes, I've actually used a dummy 3D environment in Unity, and so it's not this grainy video of my kitchen. It's actually sort of like this fake pleasingly rendered mountain cottage, and so there it's of course by default full color, and so I had to play with the settings a little bit to figure out what you have to do to the pass-through video to make it not distracting. And it seems that just by reducing the luminance, the exposure value quite a bit, like maybe cutting it by half or by 2/3, it's enough that your brain sort of can distinguish background to foreground. I mean, that's the main issue, that you need to quickly automatically distinguish foreground virtual content from background, irrelevant information.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in 2D, we have drop shadows and outlines and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm wondering is, have you thought of the interaction? Like, does the user click a thing, twist their hand, move their head? What might be natural? Because what we're seeing here is something that we're going to be doing 100 times a day in the near future, I think.
Are you asking about how to turn on the filtering for the pass-through, or maybe I'm not fully understanding the question?
I'm saying I'm in a room. It's all looking as high res and beautiful as it can, and I'm working my laptop, which is really special, and I want to dim the light, so to speak. Have you thought of a human-computer interaction for that?
No, I haven't, because the paradigm right now is that you would open up this particular app to be able to work with this content, and therefore there's no provision in my app for running without the background filter on, because it's going to be like soft space virtual content. But if I think at an OS level, then there would need to be something. I don't know. I haven't played with ways to control that reality modulation using user controlled gestures or inputs.
I have so many more questions, but I see Peter and then Stephanie. But I think reality modulation, guys, that's a t-shirt. Peter.
Yes, would it be possible to generate a fog effect? So it would be like the room, but in a heavy ground fog.
I guess you could with the upcoming hardware is supposed to have better depth detection, which is something you would need in order to map a Z value to the different parts of the pass-through video. So, because with this headset, it doesn't know which parts of this image are further away and therefore should be foggier, and which parts are closer. But that's actually a great idea, because what you really want is you want to be able to see. Well, I mean, it's starting to get to, so you may notice that like this object, this virtual object, can actually float behind this table, for example, and that's by design. It's intentional. I just think it's going to be too constraining to design something that is like really a design interface that's really reliant on physical features in your room. Like, what if you're in a hotel room and you don't have enough space to work on your PhD dissertation, which is like massive, you know? I think that would be really problematic. So part of the toning down of the background is also to make it easier for your brain to accept that like this virtual object can be floating behind the desk, you know, and it's okay. Like it looks strange at first, but it doesn't cause any like physical discomfort or anything, which it would if the background were full exposure.
Stephanie.
It's well, a new thing just occurred to me, which it seems like you should be able to just select out that floating tree of things, and have the background completely disappear. I mean, because I'm just looking at the selected thing, so that would tone it down. But my real question was like, at what point can we expect hardware that isn't any more difficult to wear than a pair of glasses, or at most a pair of goggles?
I think a while. What I do know is that from all these YouTube leaks that have happened, things are coming quite soon, you know, in the order of definitely not years, so sooner than that, from all the major players. New hardware is coming that has a much greater emphasis on ergonomics, comfort, the balance of weight on your head. You know, pass through that will actually make it feel not socially or less socially awkward to be wearing a headset and to have your eyes covered in a professional setting or in a social setting. It's going to be incremental, and like, I don't have any insider knowledge on this, but from what I've seen in the press, see-through augmented reality display technology is incredibly difficult to the point of maybe physically impossible, you know? So that's gonna take a long time, and I don't know that that's necessarily the end game. It might just be that we end up with really high quality pass-through displays, because you can also do a lot more with pass-through displays, because you have full control of the color of every pixel. So you can have occlusion, you can have filtering, you can have all the stuff that is really difficult in smart glasses.
But pass-through, that does not allow me to change my view between the VR view and my physical room.
Say that again. Sorry, pass-through does not allow you to change my location, my visual location at will, between this room I'm in right now, which you don't see, and the VR location. Well, it could, because you could have selective filtering, you know, and I haven't seen any great interface design examples of this, but you could have a virtual room that had windows through which you had the pass-through coming through. So you could like peek out the window to see what's going on in your kitchen, in your physical kitchen that you're sitting in. And then
no, I don't want to peek out. I want to look out and see where 3 small children have disappeared around the whole space. Right? I want to actually see the space, and then I want to see this space. I want a choice of spaces. That's what I want to be able to have. I think that, anyway, that's all.
Now my mind is going to all sorts of things like, you know, 3D scanners set up in your house that you could then see a recreated 3D model of your house. But I mean, at least pass-through would be much closer to offering that possibility than a see-through headset. So
yeah. But I mean, Stephanie, one of the things that I've played with in the past is having pass-through portals, where you place objects in your virtual reality environment that are stand-ins for where you always want to be able to see specific things. So you can have a doorway. I placed a specific persistent pass-through portal over my keyboard, such that I had the ability to be able to see that. So you know, once you have an overarching sort of capacity to alternate those things. There are all sorts of different ways of attenuating the virtual view so that you have the ability to see the different pieces of it.
That would be great, the attenuation. In other words, like you could like dial it down, right? If I just had an analog dial that would remove the virtual view completely from my view so that I now had my default realistic view. But then I could just turn it up again so that I could, now I'm back seeing the VR view.
I think
I
that's
mean,
what,
to give you a functional example of this, if you step outside the safety boundaries, the Oculus headset will just show you pass through. And so I'm trying to show that I'm just moving the headset outside the safety boundary, and you can see the virtual object coming in and out.
So, but you have to
Similar-
take it off. You have to take that off your head to do that, right?
no.
I could be wearing it.
It's simply it's simply a function of where you're standing, because in the parlance of the system, there's a safety boundary in which you've sort of designated it's okay for you to be. You promise that nothing's going to come in and you're going to smash a vase or hit a kid in the face, unless they come in which case it's sad for them. One of the things I think it relates to for me is the idea of having an application in the sense of a space or a context being applied to something, because we talk about apps and we sort of forget where the word comes from, but this is an app in the sense of applying oneself to a particular sort of directory structure. And you can make all kinds of different inferences about what application you are considering at a given point. It could be that you're looking in a certain place. It could be that your hands are posted in a certain place. So there would be a number of ways of sort of mediating and making determinations about what to do there.
The term used earlier, reality modulation, comes into this because what Brandel was talking about is you can cut a hole to see the reality there, like maybe where you have your coffee cup, if you're in a fully VR environment, which is quite useful, or your keyboard. But also we can pipe in other things, like a lot of us have video doorbells, like the Ring doorbell. So if you wanted to, you could say on this wall in your room where you currently have a picture, a painting, remove the painting and have that doorbell. So you will always see the front of your house, for instance. So the notion of having a window, because a normal window with VR would normally be blown out because there's too much light coming in. So why not replace it with something else? And then you get into, when you're talking about that kind of reality modulation about different spaces, if you're at home office, or if you're in an office or a coffee shop, you may still want the same information on walls. But if these are places you use frequently, you can tell the system, this wall is always for messages, this is always for timeline, or whatever it might be. So when you go to the different rooms, it'll shift a bit, but it'll still be mapped onto. But sorry.
But it's always just as much as a window, right? It's not a 360, 180 or 360 view.
Well, you can choose. VR normally is a completely synthetic environment, which is either 3D generated or can be based on photographs or whatever you want. So you can choose those. I think also the discussion here is sometimes you want to know what's in your physical environment. And one aspect of that is simply to see the video of it. Another one is to have it rendered in 3D. So you can have that, you won't knock into the desk because the desk is indicated, but the desk may look completely different. Maybe it looks like you're in a nightclub or in a jungle or something, whatever you think might be fun, but you still have the geometry so that you don't just sit down, you can move around your environment. So there's a lot of options for choices with that. But the thing that I just wanted to mention is you talked a little bit about Markdown and so on, which is interesting. So one thing we've discussed here in this group, which is actually part of my PhD thesis, well, it is my PhD thesis, is the notion of visual meta, which is super simple. A PDF document normally doesn't have any metadata. It can, but normally it doesn't. A normal book, one of the first pages, it has a page of printer's information, copyright, and so on. Are you familiar with the BibTeX standard for notation? Doesn't matter.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
So just imagine that you download a PDF. At the last page, there's an appendix that says visual meta, and then you have author equals, and then a name, date equals, and then the date, la, la, la. Can also have the structure of the document, headings are so-and-so, references are so-and-so. All these things are there. One of the things that we've discussed very much with Peter Wasilko's input is how that can be extended with further appendices. So a document that goes from your normal word processor with this information into your environment, you can then choose to put, let's say, the glossary over here, the references, do whatever you want. But when you go out, all those spatial representation, which is why it was so great to hear you talk about the coordinates, is then encoded. So you can keep working in a 2D document, do whatever you want, but when you then go back in your environment again, all these things will snap back into that space.
Yeah. I mean, on a general level, the coming up with some sort of legible mapping from something like metadata relations or some other inherently non-spatial qualities of the 2D media that we work with all the time. So in this case, metadata about text or about PDFs. A legible and reliable mapping of that to a 3D representation or spatial representation that you can manipulate and you can make sense of and see, you know, like very clearly in front of you. But then when you take the headset off, you go back to the original file, those manipulations have resulted in the changes that you expect to have, you know, those manipulations to enact. That is in general, I think, a really going to be a very powerful quality of these spatial interfaces, that you will be able to quickly, intuitively, kinesthetically make sense of this metadata that usually, you know, on a 2D interface is at best kind of just listed out, and at worst like hidden away or doesn't exist at all, as you said.
Yeah, it's something I'd love to continue discussion with you at some other point. I see 3 hands. First one I think is Fabian.
Yeah, I was wondering about, we discussed about the transition, the boundary between the real or modularization of what's not. I was wondering about using a bit like the inverse of a window, so that you have your either a normal display or e-ink that you stick on the wall, and that shows, let's say, the last view you had to your notes. For example, here you have the mirroring of your quest. So it's a prompt to dive back, let's say, that space. But I imagine you don't have it always on. But as you have that position in space, you could save it in this state. So e-ink device, you can even like physically print it if you don't think you update it a lot from a window. And if you have like, so that's, let's say, the virtual world, that's your point of view of the headset toward that virtual world. And maybe you have a mirror so that I can't put my e-ink here, not be very convenient in my office, but if I stick it there on the wall, then I can actually leave it. And it's again always a prompt to reconsider how you organize that space. So yeah, I'm wondering if that could be an interesting display. Yeah, you have your organized virtual space, because most of us have a desk with documents on it, and that permanence is pretty valuable. And we also have libraries or bookshelves behind us, and we do like to reach behind and somehow organize based on the reference we have. So I'm wondering, there is the beauty of having this infinite space you could reconfigure, but somehow it's hidden away. Like if you put your quest on the side, then it's all hidden. You of course have your desktop. You can just like start with a prototype of just changing the desktop or having a window there. But I think I'm wondering how being disconnected from the whole desktop would be interesting, having like this virtual permanent window of the organized space, how it would feel. I have no idea, but should be interesting to try.
That's a great term. It's like prompt, this little reminder, like a magic window back into this garden, you know, it's like the garden of ideas that you sort of occasionally glance at, think, okay, not now, but it's reminding you, okay, it is there. I mean, the practical question of how to access this information when you don't have the headset on you, or if you want to share it with somebody who doesn't have the hardware, I think that was very much the underlying motivation for the experiment I did with the ordinal spatial layout. Because if you have such a layout, what you could do is, for example, always be reading and writing back to a Dropbox folder. And to markdown files in the Dropbox folder. And many of these note-taking tools like Logseq or Obsidian actually just work with markdown files in exposed folders. They're local first applications. And so if that's the case, then your reminder to go back into the headset could be that you are actually working on the exact same notes most of the time on your laptop, but when you need to look at a bunch of images, so visual content is really difficult to make sense of in these interfaces. Or when you have just finished doing a brain dump and you need to see, how can I in 5 minutes just make sense of all of this? And if you put the headset on, and there is this reversible mapping from the 2D information, the ordinal information, and its metadata to a 3D representation, then you can just put the headset on and be looking at exactly your Obsidian notebook, do some stuff, move some things around, take your headset off, and then when you in the headset create a little outline of here are the 3 categories, here are the 3 relations between them, and when you take your headset off, go back to your laptop, it's there. I mean, but that doesn't, I think that's kind of separate. That's a more practical sort of you need to be able to do this for such a tool to be at all practically usable. But that's separate from, Fabian, your suggestion, this very lovely poetic suggestion of having a magic mirror view that's always reminding you, it's sort of it subtly updates itself in response to changes that have been happening in the 3D workspace. And even it might just be that even having being able to quickly glance at the global structure. For example, even this thing that we're looking at on the screen right now, I don't really know what it means at the moment because I haven't really worked in it as a 3D object for long enough. But if you have worked in it for an hour or two, you might start getting a sense of this cluster of ideas over here means this part of my research, and then there's a big distance between that and the next cluster. Maybe having something like that, just easily accessible, would be enough to trigger some of these memories that you will have developed working in a 3D space.
So this is, you kind of almost made a throwaway remark that this is a little practical thing or whatever. I think this is probably the most important thing we can discuss, because brilliant minds we'll look at how best to use it. That will be iteration and testing and discussing, but how to be able to share it. It is so important to take it in and out. I have a word processor called Author, and Brandel has been kind enough to dig into my files and to provide access to a VR view. So that's a nice little hack. But if we can provide an ecosystem where these things can be used, it is the dream. It would be absolutely fantastically wonderful. I see Keith has joined us, which is lovely. I'm not going to tell anyone where he works. Meta. Anyway, Peter.
Okay, I have a few links on the sidebar. The first link that I dropped in was to an NHK program. It was a cultural heritage piece that had a segment in it on 3D imaging of temples and historical cultural sites to generate VR replicas of them. It's a very nice video to watch, and it's about maybe halfway to 2/3-ish in for that segment of it. Then I dropped a link to Mark Bernstein's essay discussing typed hypertext links, which also seemed relevant to today's discussion. Then I included a link to a small excerpt from the 1990s movie Johnny Mnemonic, depicting the use of a VR headset for accessing the internet. And the interesting thing is the time scenario was targeted as being 2021. So it seemed incredibly timely that back in 1995, they'd anticipate that 2021 would be the exact time that technology would be coming online. So you might enjoy watching that short little video clip. Then I put in 2 links related to BibTech, and I finished out with a link to a Michael Benedict paper re-examining some ideas from their seminal book, Cyberspace First Steps, which was an MIT Press book currently out of print that I've talked about many times in here, which introduced the idea of unfolding of spaces in VR. So you can be looking at 3 spatial dimensions that will be associated with 3 parameters of a higher dimensional object, and you'd then be able to select a point within the first 3 that would effectively either correspond to an actual object or to a data point, allowing you to open it to a whole range of other objects that correspond to basically having those first 3 search parameters at the value of the location you set. So in this case, instead of positioning objects in VR, your positioning is the query to access the higher dimensional object, and then unfolding it, which was depicted almost as if a second cube being opened with half the face is cut away, so that you're basically looking in on an open cutout slice of a box in a flipped orientation depicting 3 additional dimensions, and you'd then be able to do that. Another idea that I've been kicking around for a long time in hypertext systems would be to have a mirror mode where you'd be able to reverse the nesting structure that you'd use to traverse to a given point. So you'd be able to effectively turn around and look back up through the containment hierarchy that allowed you to reach the node that you were currently at. And being able to toggle on and off a mirror node strikes me as a very useful affordance that I have yet to see in any systems I've had to work with.
I'm going to spend the next week digging into all of these. One point that you mentioned about mapping the actual position, the Cartesian position of a node to some sort of some values or some metadata is that's very close to what I've been sketching up for prototype number 5, or I don't know which number it'll be in the end, but a way to represent properties, for example, and there's a metadata of these content blocks. If, for example, if it's a quantitative property, then it's very sort of clear how you might map that to a spatial dimension. But even something like a Boolean, like, you know, is this image, has this image already been edited or has it not, right? You could do all sorts of things in terms of mapping it to positions. You could snap it to one plane or another, depending on the Boolean value. You could also represent the Boolean values true, false as 2 free-floating nodes in and of themselves that try to pull the things that are true closer to themselves and try to pull things that are false closer to themselves. And then if you had, you know, 5, 10, I don't know, probably at a certain point it would stop making sense, but if you had multiple properties like these, so you had a couple of Boolean properties, you had a couple of like numerical properties, and you just let them all settle into the configuration that the whole system wants to. I mean, it's kind of like you're doing, I don't know, it's like principal component analysis, but really rough and maybe, you know, interactive and manipulable and really difficult to understand because it's not at all mathematically rigorous. But for some collections of information, you know, like maybe you're writing a paper and you started adding some quantitative properties or toggle properties to things, and you just want to see, okay, like I'm kind of stuck here. I just want the system to tell me what shape can these bits of information take if I prioritize these properties or deprioritize those other ones. That's definitely something I'm thinking about for prototype number 5, but that's another, you know, it's kind of like another parallel track altogether. I mean, I just wanted to kick it back to everybody a little bit because Frodo sent an email a couple of weeks ago talking about the question of how to relate text and information more generally in a 3D environment, you know, one to another. Either the question of like literally the visual representation of the relations between things or a more conceptual level. So something that's like I'm not struggling with, but definitely I'm in the thick of it at the moment with prototype 04 is how to represent and how to think about the relations between blocks of text to each other, blocks of text to topics, blocks of text to multimedia like images or URLs. Stephanie made a very good point that relations are not either all relations are references because they are of type, you know, it's a reference, but then you should specify what kind of reference it is, or references but one of many possible kinds of relations. I had a conversation, I'm having a lot of conversations with people about semantic triples in relation to semantic web recently, but specifically to text, which is very slippery as well. It's you know, natural language. There's interpretation involved. How have you all been thinking about, or what examples have you seen of ways to relate things? I'm thinking all the way back from Ted Nelson's like Xanadu style transclusion indicators to I don't know, like something like this prototype I'm showing here with like these radial links and lines.
Fabian,
I want to step back just a bit on. It's going to sound a bit harsh. I find your work very interesting, but I'm probably never going to use it because I need to make it myself. I think the research you do is interesting, but I don't think you can explore all of it. And some, for example, of my quirky ideas, I think nobody's going to explore. But why I find, and rightfully so, but I'm still going to explore it. And that's also why I like programming, is because I can have some really strange ideas, and maybe it's going to be, nobody should explore them because it's going to be useless for them, but I want to be able to do that. So the problem I have is if I use somebody else's system, at some point I get stuck. I don't want to reinvent the whole wheel though. And I obviously can't even do that. So what I'm going into here is some of the ideas both of us have, some of the ideas are not shared. One of the beauty of the power of, I guess, tools like Notion or all the PKM, PIM trend of the moment is also that some of the effort is being distributed through the community. So I'm just wondering, are there components, patterns, things, for example, that make Unity so famous or popular that we should do together, that we as a community should have, like maybe, I don't know, implementing some way to explore Dropbox or Google Drive or whatnot. We don't have to keep on re-implementing that, or maybe some way to spatialize. We don't have to. So I'm just thinking it completely naively. I don't have an answer to this, but I'm wondering what are the things we should re-implement from scratch because we need to dig there and there is no answer. What are the things we should not re-implement? Do you have some patterns? Do you have some plugins or cookbook or recipes that you want to rely on that also maybe you don't want to explore because you don't find interesting, but you know it could be interesting and you want to rely on this? So yeah, I'm wondering a bit like at the larger scale, at a community of people who are interested in managing knowledge, writing or reading text in VR, how can we be a bit more strategical about the work we can do?
That's an excellent question, and super, I think answering this question is going to make all the difference in whether things like what I'm building can become useful enough and good enough that there is mainstream adoption or not. I mean, I think the shorthand answer is open sourcing some or all of parts of these projects. I'm in conversation with Brian Eppert of Noda, which is a VR mind mapping application. He's brought up a lot of similar points, which is like we're all either reinventing the wheel or we're relying on very poorly adapted frameworks that come from the gaming world, where you're like essentially you're given options to like fire weapons at your PDFs, and there probably is a lot of, well, I would say there's going to be increasing duplicated effort now that it seems that people are actually tackling this class of application seriously. I would say even a couple of years ago, there wasn't necessarily much duplication of effort because like everyone was only making games in VR. So off the top of my head, things like, I had to re-implement by hand an image processing library, and I had to implement by hand an image texturing LODing system. Text Mesh Pro is already pretty good, but I had to definitely tweak that a lot to make it usable. And so there are a lot of these things that if you're like developing a web app, you would never, ever in a million years in 2022 want to build by yourself, because it would, you'll have like 1,000 excellent libraries already available. And that's just not where we are. But I think not duplicating effort, while, as you're saying, be mindful of the areas where it's productive to just dig on your own, because there's much more there than has already been discovered. balancing between those two. But I think like I've just moved so much more slowly than I would have liked with building the first version of the app, version 2022. Now with version 2020, the one with the big white room, because of the need to just reinvent a lot of these building blocks that exist in abundance in other platforms. I have many of them now in the sort of toolbox, and that's been great. And that's one of the factors in why like these prototypes I've been showing you, I started building in February. And so I'm quite happy. I could be faster, but I'm pretty happy with how quickly they've come together, in large part because, you know, I had done like years and years of work of like the pinch like spatial cursor thing took, I don't know how many months to really figure out and build. And that's the kind of thing that I also would be happy to sort of promote as an alternative paradigm to the larger community. I mean, there are issues with it. You have fatigue and all this stuff, but just as an alternative to the laser pointer, you know, which it has so many issues, both ergonomic and just like conceptual to me. Like it's a mock weapon, right? Those are examples of things I'd be more than happy to have like other people adopt, offer feedback on, and if it's open source, to other people to like improve on at a much faster rate than like one party would be able to do. So Fabian, basically, yes, let's talk about that, because I absolutely don't want to like reinvent an entire operating system from scratch.
Yeah, I see we have two good hands coming up here, but just really briefly, I share your frustration about doing something commercial and also being part of a community. It's really hard to decide what's going to be your secret sauce, so to speak, and what has to be shared. My initial feeling with what you're doing here is data in and out should be shared, and you know, working on protocols. But people should be able to choose your environment, and you have your amazing interactions. But it's a stressful and longer discussion. Brandel, you're first, and then Bob, you're second in the queue from now. Yeah.
Awesome. So in an answer to your question of like how would you apply spaces and attributes to data, I dropped a link in the chat to a researcher who used to be at University of Monash, is now at University of Queensland, Maxime Cordell. He did this immersive axes. I've shown it in this group before, but it's really phenomenal in terms of being able to show multivariate data. And more generally, one of the things that I think is really valuable is having the ability to really rapidly and substantially alter the arrangement, layout, and visual appearance with gestural kind of manipulation that has a quick and one-to-one impact in terms of scaling things or moving things or coloring things, changing aspects of their object's velocity, those things that are the most detectable to us in a lizard brain kind of way, but ones that we can actually modify and sculpt the kind of presentation of, which is somewhat at odds with another really important thing for us, which is the sort of the persistent spatiality of aspects. But there are, I think, interesting ways of trying to square that circle for individuals doing different things. A question that I had for you was, with all of these prototypes, including back to 2020, but also your 1 through 4, have you sat with them and used them and thought about the impact that they have on what you do? Like with this beautiful tree view, and I'd love for you to kind of move your headset around and talk a little bit, especially for Bob, because he came late, about what this is. I think he'll get a kick out of it. Has it changed what you think of, or how you understand what these things are, and what do you want to do with them as a consequence?
That's a great question. So eating my own dog food, you know, on a sort of practical level, like, can I use these tools I'm building to actually do some very minimal amount of the work that I'm proposing people use them for? And so the blog posts I published for prototypes 2 and 3, I wrote the first drafts of in the prototypes themselves. And prototype 2, which I didn't show you because it was a really simple, sort of like was a dumbed down version of prototype 3, totally focused on text editing and writing. I sat in there for my benchmark for success for that one was if I could sit for 1 hour and just write. And I didn't, at first I thought I could qualify this with like, oh, can I write well, or can I write, X number of words? But actually it turns out if you can't write comfortably and productively, you're going to stop after 30 seconds, because it's just the most frustrating thing in the world to try to write something when the interface is like getting in your way or whatever. And once I got to the point where I could actually write, it was like an 800-word draft, I think, and it published, it was 1,200 with additional comments and images. Once I got to 1 hour mark, I knew, okay, that's pretty good for me. Like I've surprised myself that I'm convinced you can write comfortably in a VR headset, which I was very scared of the answer to that question when I embarked on that process. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's plays me.
And the higher level question of like, have I changed how I think about what this is, what this information is? Absolutely. And I want to give this is all just making me want to like go back to work and finish building project 4, because are you all familiar with, or are any of you familiar with Alexander Obenauer's itemized OS? I will post that in the chat. So the itemized OS, post that quickly, is a proposed paradigm for designing. It's a proposed paradigmatic design for a computer operating system where the lowest level primitive is an atomic item, which can be any sort of block of content. So a block of text, an image, a PDF. It can also be a composite of those things. So you can have like a calendar event that's like a text at a time, etc. And these atomic units are sort of infinitely flexibly recombinable into different configurations, and they can be contained, and the containers can have certain logic about what they do to the containees, but the containees are only ever sort of this sort of temporarily contained within the container. It's not that if you delete the container, all the items go away as well. So I guess the difference between one of the differences between the itemized OS and the OSs that we actually use that are actually out in the world are that items have a sort of primacy that files and folders don't. And files and folders have a definite location in your computer. The containment structure is a tree. In the itemized OS, it's a full graph. You can have any sort of graph relations pointing any which ways, which to me does sound a little bit overwhelming potentially for someone who just wants to check their email and make sure they get to their haircut on time with their calendar app. But maybe as like an underlying layer that would give power users or developers all this flexibility that they currently don't have, it's not a bad idea. And working in all the examples that Alexander Obenauer gives, and especially the visual mock-ups he's created of how this would work in the 2D environment, always run into this problem of views, which is that if you have a bunch of, so to give you a very concrete example, I think one of his examples is you receive an email with a calendar invitation in it. And in the itemized OS, the calendar invitation would be its own item that you can move into your calendar, and the calendar invitation has this existence independent of the email that arrived in and the calendar view that you're seeing it in relative to your other events. And there's in the mockups, you see sort of the email as a window with the event in it, and then you see the calendar window with the event in it, and you're always jumping between these different views, even if the data is sort of living in the same spot, in IPFS or whatever it is. The way the interface represents these things to you is as different things that are in different locations, because from the physical world, we've learned that a cup that is in my apartment right now cannot be the same thing as a cup that's in Brandon's apartment, because that almost by definition that makes them different cups. Whereas in the itemized OS, they can and should be the same item. And so in a what prototype 04 right now is trying, the missing step is that that document container is actually just another type of item that has been expanded and has pulled in all the other items that are contained in it. You could collapse it and then everything go back to the force directed graph structure, or open up another container that would then temporarily sort of take over the layout, and all the items that it contained would, you know, sort of rush into it. And so you have this literal continuity of existence of items which are canonical. Like there's a canonical representation of each canonical thing. And I mean, the reason why I'm calling all these things prototypes is because I have no idea if this is a great, good idea or not, actually, in practice. But I'm pretty sure in some use cases, it is an excellent idea. And a concrete one is, you know, coming from architectural design. I have a lot of early users who are architects themselves because I harass them into like using Solspace. And when you're doing visual research, you're doing mood boarding. You don't want to actually duplicate, like images are interesting because they are very immutable, like they rarely change. So you really have you have one image and you don't want to make a copy because you're not going to like make changes to that image if you move it into a different folder, or if you want to reference it in a different part of your project. It's the same image, it's the same core idea. And so for mood boarding as a use case, or for any sort of like visual heavy research, this ability to actually see the same idea represented by a canonical visual representation of it, moving between the different places where it is playing a role in your project, I think could be very powerful and actually useful. So this is something that has only occurred to me, Brandon, in response to your question, after having played with my prototype 3, and then I had a call with Connor White Sullivan at Rome, and we like butted heads over references and containment and things. And afterward I realized, no, Connor's right. I had just been sort of like I couldn't see the possibilities that my prototype was presenting, just because I was so stuck in the items in folders, living in only one place, and therefore to show that thing somewhere else, it had to be like a symlink, or it had to be some other sort of like type of relation. But actually, no, it could just be the same kind of relation of being like contained in something, or not contained but referenced in something. So yeah, that's one small example. I hope to find more, but it's also like the reason why I'm really stuck. I'm really excited about this one in particular is because if I'm wary of these insights that might come to me that only occur to someone who has worn a headset and tried these things, right? But the fact that I've come to kind of like this idea for a certain information architecture, and then I find examples of it not only in contemporary writings like Alexander Obenauer's, but also going all the way back to like transclusion. Like, what's transclusion? This is transclusion, right? That makes me really excited. It feels like, okay, this is two ends of the donut like finally coming together, where you have the conceptual possibility and the technical possibility, and one was like really far away from the other, but now like they're finally able to touch.
Bob, finally your turn.
Thanks, Froda. Sorry I was late to this session. I had eye surgery yesterday, so I had a post-op this morning. I'm interested in several topics back now, and if I'm mistaken, please just pass on to what you're interested in. But I thought I heard that Yuli was interested in the relationships between different parts of text that might have to do with content that goes beyond metadata. And yes, if that is a topic, then I would be interested in having a conversation about that.
Absolutely. Just to frame it a little bit, and Bob, right?
Yes.
I I want to hear what you have to say on this topic. But the framing is this, which is if you go looking for information on the semantic web on the internet, as I did, you come across this concept, this core concept of the semantic triple, which is an object, a predicate, and a subject. So Eve eats the apple, or whatever. And to me, and the semantic web painted this picture of a web that was basically full of these semantic triples, and you could do all this processing and querying and automatic deduction based on these semantic triples. But what always struck me, and just like people who work on semantic web themselves kind of acknowledge, is that it's obviously very labor intensive. You need to manually create all these sort of like every single relation between one thing and another has to be clearly manually defined, and then all these questions raised up of like aliasing, like what if the verb and the noun version of that concept should really be the same thing, or it just gets really messy really quickly. And also it was unclear to me at what level in the system, what level of abstraction this meaning should really live. Is it something that's like very low level technical, pervasive, machine legible? Or is it on the other end of the spectrum, is it something that is, almost like by definition human and poetic, and it will vary subtly from even one speaker of the language to another, and be completely open to interpretation? Which is why I think, for example, Rome and its sort of clones have settled on this typeless reference, where you just point a block of text to some other concept, and there's just like this one way, this like directed reference, and there isn't a way to get, I don't know if it's in the works, to define what kind of reference that might be, whether it is a like supporting evidence or refuting evidence, or an instance of something, etc. So then it got me thinking, okay, well, one is like, if that were the case, if you did have typed references, how would you, does having a spatial interface open up new possibilities for representing them? For example, you have a line from the block, object block to subject block, with this line with the predicate like displayed in the middle. That's a very simple example. Is that even useful, or would that be overwhelming? And then I thought, well, maybe we're thinking about it backwards. Like maybe the block of text itself is the predicate. Normally you would be writing a sentence like, Yiliu works in VR, right? This is a sentence in a text block, and Yiliu might be one topic and VR might be another topic. And it might actually be that like Yiliu is the object, VR is the subject, and this messy, squishy, natural language content object, which is not typed at all, it's just like, it is what it is, it's literally that unique string of characters, is the relation, is the predicate from one to the other. And therefore from one to the other, there could be like every place where those two concepts are ever mentioned in the same paragraph, that paragraph is a predicate. And then you could take another level and say, any place where there's like an indirect relation, it's also kind of like a deducible predicate between, Yiliu works in VR, VR is an emerging technology, in which case like Yiliu has this relation to emerging technologies, right? And then once I got thinking that, then I just thought, well, I'm not going to try to make sense of this. What if it were all just a force-directed graph, and you could visually see it as being like connected from like the Yiliu node to the VR node to the emerging technologies node? And I don't know what exactly that would mean, but it would mean something, and you would be able to like concretely look at it and do something with it. But I don't know, and that's just sort of the train of thought that I've gone through, and I'm sure there's been a lot more work and research in this area that I'm not aware of. So I'm very happy to get pointers on references and ideas.
What I've heard you saying is that there may be structures that have already been discovered that relate chunks of text, that maybe one sentence to maybe seven to nine sentences, which is what I saw in a demo that I taped. The answer is yes. There are such things. They
Amazing.
were invented 50 years ago or more by me. There are, for example, in stable subject matters, the kind that exist in textbooks and procedures, policies, and documentation, training materials in business, there are 40 such structures with a few, loose ones at the end, some others, but 40
Wow,
stable,
okay.
40 stable ones. They've been used in business and industry and government for the last 50 years. There are, when I left being CEO and chairman of the company that sold them, we had trained 400,000 technical writers in business in 30 countries around the world. They all paid for this information. All right. So
Amazing. Okay.
that's one structure. It was at the time, I sold the company long ago, 30 years ago, and I think it still exists,
Did Bob just?
27 years.
Oh, come back. Okay.
Anyway, there are other structures that relate text like that. There are about 15 to 20 that I could tell you about and outline, and there are a bunch more that need a lot of work, a lot of intellectual work on to improve human thinking.
So on that note,
Amazing.
we have come up to the 2-hour mark, and we try to keep to that. So this will be now uploaded, transcribed, and distributed. Any final comments? And to make it clear, you're very welcome to come back and continue the conversation on any Monday or Friday. It's a very worthwhile topic. It sure is related to what we're dealing with. And obviously that goes for all of you, not just the monthly meeting.
That's my only question, which is like, can I come back to this forum, because this is incredible, and I'm very
please.
Have Fabian, thank you for the connection, and thanks to everybody for taking the time. And I definitely have the sense, or 1,000 other threads that we could have chased down, and if I can come back on a more regular basis, we maybe have more opportunities to chase them.
So let's have 1,000 more meetings. And on that note,
Zoom will be very happy with that. Yes.
have a good weekend, everyone. It's good to see you.
Thanks
See you
again.
on Monday.
Thank you.
Bye.